Infinimat review, take one! Alright, so I wanted to talk about the Infinimat for a while now, just because I can't find much material of it online. When I was researching buying it, there's just not many people commenting about the real world use of it and the actual experience they have using it on set. So I figured I'd formulate my thoughts, write a little script, shoot a little video to just talk about it, coming from someone who's like a mid to low level filmmaker working on very small budget sets and mostly like 1 or 2 man band crews. Pardon me also if I'm looking down at the iPad a lot, just because I want to make sure I'm hitting every talking point and making sure I'm going through everything I want to talk about. So I wanted to buy the Infinimat because I wanted like a quick panel light that's kind of easy to set up, that outputs a decently soft source in a short amount of setup time. Something like a cop light, still need a lot of diffusion, a lot of modification to a usable state in like a key light setting. I also wanted something a bit more premium in comparison to like the Amaran's F21, F22 series of lights. And I thought it'd be fun to get into an ecosystem of lights that I've not seen much on set, especially here in like the Kentucky filmmaking area. That might be a good thing or a bad thing depending how you look at it. Sort of like unproven technology. I've seen a lot of Amaran F21s, F22s out here, but not many Infinimats. So recently I've used the Infinimat. The version I have is the 4x1 version. I've used it on a 48-hour film recently. We used it in conjunction with the 600C, multiple tube lights, and all within like the Aputure ecosystem of lights. So just so to work more efficiently and smoothly, we used, I think, the 600 as like a harsh sunlight, and Infinimat sort of brought in as like a soft key light. If I'm looking here a lot, it's because the Infinimat's here. It's like I'm like talking about it and it's keying me right now. But yeah, we used it on the 48-hour film. I'll try to throw up some BTS here, some footage of what we got with the Infinimat, and also some BTS stills and or videos. Yeah, we also used the RGB effect on the Infinimat a lot for like TV effects. Another shoot I used it on recently was a gaffing project for a marketing campaign for Wicked World. We used it as like an overhead ambient source, and for like A-roll stuff, the skirt attachment for the softbox came in useful when trying to like prevent spill off the background. Then recently I also used it on like a branded storytelling piece where I was also gaffing. We used it as like a soft key on top of like a harsh sunlight effect. So I realized that 4x1 form factor is actually still not as soft as I would like it to be. It still needed to be softened up with like an artificial silk or like some light diffusion material just to get it, to be really soft and nice on skin tones. Then just last week I used it for some talking head interviews for a non-profit. Once again, we used the Infinimat as like a soft key light on subjects. We had to use it at like 100% most of the time just because it was shooting through like unbleached muslin, and yeah, that kind of thicker diffusion material was sort of hard to punch through, so it was always on 100% and going like full spark always. A lighter diffusion material probably worked better for like interviews, but that unbleached muslin was the only one we had access to. Now the big appeal for the Infinimat is of course the panel light form factor. Theoretically, a fixture with like a large surface area, like 4 square feet in the case of my model, would be useful in situations where you don't have a lot of space to rig up like a book light setup or like a large octagonal softbox. So the Infinimat only takes up like a foot of length in comparison to like a softbox that's like 3 or 4 feet. So if you're like in a tight space, you don't need as much distance between like the fixture and like your diffusion rag to get like a nice soft source on your subject. Something like a cop light would probably take up a lot more space to fill like a large diffusion rag. Another great thing that comes with the Infinimat is the grid and the skirt attachments. It's like really simple to set up. The Velcro system like around the edge of the Infinimat is really simple to just like rip off and put on a new modifier. You want to do the skirt, you just put it on, just get 4 corners in and it's basically set up. Same thing with the grid, you just make sure you attach 4 different corners, and it takes like a couple seconds really just set up. We've all seen the marketing videos of people setting up the Infinimat in like a couple seconds, but actually let's see how true that is. So not as quick as you would think, you know. It still takes quite a while to get it out of the case, to put the frame in, to inflate it, to get it on a stand and stuff like that. So, you know, not as quick as just a couple of seconds. However, I think the inflatable nature of like the softbox material is actually very convenient. It's very fun and low-key like satisfying to do. You know, you pop in the pump and, you know, it blows up, and now you have like a huge soft source ready to go in like a couple minutes. I've had problems with the F22 bracket system where it's like incredibly finicky to like get the edges of the frame like into the holes. You know, you have to kind of like work against like the spring system, and it's just hard to work with. With the Infinimat, I think they've designed something very convenient where all you need to do is just pinch the ends of the frame into the holes, and there are latches on each of the arms to adjust the length of where the frame connects to the mounting point. And the carbon fiber material of the frame is very lightweight and feels quite durable. I think that's actually one of the best features of the Infinimat, the frame and the setup of it. The ballast is like a huge chunky boy. It with like many inputs and outputs, some that I probably would never use, and it can power up to 3 lights. It's crazy that you need to pack this thing like a separate case apart from the softbox. Another feature that the Infinimat has that is particular to it is the pixel control settings, where you can actually individually program each of the 2x1 panels to basically act as separate units from the other. So theoretically, you can mimic something like a bluff bounce, you know, have one panel be blue, one panel be, you know, warm, or you can completely turn off one panel if you just want a slightly smaller source. You could also do some really cool RGB effects, you know, just kind of go wild with it or shoot something like a music video. However, I think overall, just having 2 individual panels is, you know, there's only so much you can do with it. You probably get more use out of the pixel control with something like the 4x4 or the 8x8 or 20x20 units. When I first bought it, I thought you could do like chase patterns on it, like what you can do with like Astera Titan tubes or like the Infinibars, but alas, it can't be done. That would be so hype if you can like actually control like the individual pixels of the panel, but it's fine. Okay, so moving on to some complaints that I have with this light, and there are quite some. For one, CytoSync Pro doesn't support pixel control yet. I don't know whether this can be considered a problem with like the Infinimat or just like Aputure software support, but I still need to use the legacy app or the mobile version of CytoSync to get like the pixel control, which is a bit silly because like CytoSync Pro is supposedly like paywall. Now they paywall something on the iPad, and yet they still don't have the pixel control. So it's kind of frustrating. CytoSync Pro is just overall a bit janky. For something that is now paid, it's just kind of goofy that they don't have like pixel control for the Infinimat as part of it yet. Luckily, they're still keeping up with the legacy version of the app, so at least for like a couple more months, I can still use that to get pixel control if I want. Okay, another slight con, that is the weight. The weight of the Infinimat is actually quite heavy. Once it's inflated, you'll be surprised as to like how chunky this thing is. Rigging this thing up on like overhead Manus arm, it takes a fair bit of heavy duty grip equipment, so gotta keep that in mind. The softbox actually does not pack down into like a small footprint at all. The case that it comes in is pretty hefty in comparison to like a F22C where, you know, everything can pack down into that small like 2x1 case. So it just takes up a large footprint whenever it's packed up. There's just a lot of empty space within the kit. I'm not sure whether you can fit like maybe multiple Infinimats into this one case. If you could, that would maybe save it, but you know, I don't have another Infinimat to test that out with. Another thing is the inability to swap like diffusion materials on the Infinimat itself. It's kind of frustrating. You're stuck with like the stock, I think it's like half grit or like quarter grit. I think it's half grit material that comes on the softbox in comparison to like the F22, where, you know, you have companies like Cinerags that are making like third-party diffusion materials they can throw on and get like a different feel from the light. It's kind of a big deal in the sense that if you want ultimate flexibility, the Infinimat kind of doesn't give you that, but you can always still throw up another piece of diffusion material in front of it if you want a different look. It just, you know, would cut your output. Yeah, it would be hard for third-party manufacturers to make different diffusion materials for the Infinimat just because of the inflatable mechanism. Okay, moving on to like a hard look at the comparison between the F22 and the Infinimat. I know we've already gone over like some aspects where it's different and there are pros and cons for each other, but this section is just strictly focusing on like comparing the two. Now, the obvious difference between the two is the form factor. Of course, my Infinimat is a 4x1 fixture, while the F22 is a 2x2. Both are 4 square feet, but the Infinimat is a rectangle, a very long rectangle, while the F22 is like a perfect square. There can be pros and cons to both. I think the 2x2 is kind of like a more practical size. 2 feet is almost like the perfect size for giving like a soft key on the subject without taking up too much space. 4x1 has some pros to it as well. If you put it vertical, it can give you a more like contrasty look, and then if you rotate it, you can then wrap around a bit more. So you have like two extremes where you can have like really contrasty and like super wrappy. Something tells me that Aputure didn't want to make like a 2x2 Infinimat just because it would maybe eat into the sales of like the F22, but that's just me speculating. Now, it might be surprising to know that the Infinimat and the F22 actually have the same output in terms of photometrics according to their manuals. You would think that the Infinimat has more output, but I'm not sure whether it's like the 4x1 shape that kind of dissipates the output unevenly, as opposed to the F22 being more concentrated source that contributes to that. And of course, 0.1% dimming is always very fun to have. I think the F22 can't go down to 0.1, while the Infinimat can. Another quick side note is another comparable light to the Infinimat would be like the IntelliTech Mega Light Cloth. I don't have much experience with it, but from my research, it doesn't give as much output as the Infinimat, and it has the downside of not being an Aputure product. Can't use Sidus Link with it, so that was like a big deal breaker for me, having app control for it. But if you're looking for something that was in the same family of like panel lights, I guess that would be a good option as well. So looking at the price of the Infinimat, I paid around like 1,009 for the softbox and the ballast. It's 800 for the ballast, it's like 1,100 for the softbox. It's definitely a premium product, because considering like you can technically buy an entire F22 with just the price of the ballast, it's kind of crazy how expensive it is. I could have two F22s instead of one Infinimat, so that's tough. Now, looking to the future, I would for sure continue bringing this on set. It's just a nice panel light to have. Some inconveniences, some drawbacks here and there, but overall, it's a solid light that probably won't break down on set. And I would think about further investing into the Infinimat ecosystem. Probably get the 2x4 next. The 4x4 is just like way too big, but I want something that can just give me a soft source without having like to put diffusion in front of it. And I think the 4x2 should be able to do that. And I'd be interested to see how running multiple lights off one ballast will work. Whether you need like an extension for the header cable or something, if you're gonna run it like across set. I could see like if you wanted to just have a key light and like a hair light for like an interview, that could be easy to set up. You can run it off one ballast, and the cables are probably long enough to connect to it. But if you want to run it like across set, that might be a problem. So we'll see where this Infinimat journey takes us in the future. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Infinimat 4x1. I figured I'd put my 2 cents out here, write a little something, shoot a little video about my experiences with it and how I've used it on set, some of the complaints I have with it. I'm very upfront and honest about that, and also some of the good stuff that it has to offer. It's definitely a very premium product, and I'm personally not using it to its full potential, I don't think. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it gave you some information that's good, and hopefully this all makes sense. Yeah, but yeah, thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.